Hey guys, tonight we drift into the shadowed heart of Harlem in the late 1980s, where the hum of streetlights flickers above cracked sidewalks and Cadillacs idle low under neon signs. You can smell roasted peanuts on 125th Street, hear radios blaring Big Daddy Kane from corner stores, and feel the heat coming up from underground like the city itself is alive. Somewhere in that rhythm walks Rich Porter, a teenager with velvet swagger and a smile too quick to be trusted. Rich doesn't just walk Harlem, he owns the air around him. Clean haircut, gold rope chain, a silk shirt that costs more than a month's rent. Kids part like the Red Sea when he shows up. Grown men nod from stoops with respect, disguised as envy. His name carries weight not because he says it does, but because every dealer, bodega owner, and beat cop already knows it. But here's the first truth. That shine? It's not armor. It's bait. Because if you stand out too bright in Harlem, someone's always watching. Someone always wants to dim your light. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I pour real time into building these midnight stories, and your support helps keep the lights low and the tales deep. Drop your location and time in the comments. I love knowing where and when we're drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Rich is born in 1965 into the belly of Harlem, not the Harlem of postcards, jazz, or Langston Hughes. By the 70s, it's a different story. The factories are gone, the landlords have stopped pretending to care, and the heroin trade has sunk into the bones of tenement walls. That's the Harlem Rich grows up in. Not just a place of rhythm, but of rupture. A place where charm could be currency, and a good hustle might just feed the whole family. By 10, he's already sharp. Aunt Janice, who raises him most days, says he's got eyes like a chess player and hands too fast for Sunday school. She warns him constantly, tells him the streets don't love anybody, especially not boys who smile too easily and learn too quick. But Rich listens like most kids do, partially, selectively, then not at all. He runs errands, carries bags, watches doors. These are his internships. By 13, he's got a Rolodex in his head and a mental map of every dealer in a 30-block radius. It isn't long before older boys start giving him more serious work. One man, a local lieutenant for a mid-level heroin crew, calls him Little Richie, but never says it with disrespect. At 14, Rich is already earning, not just a little, thousands, more than most of the grown men on his block. He starts handing cash to his mother without explaining where it came from. At first, she refuses, then cries, then pretends she doesn't see it anymore. The refrigerator stays full. The phone stays on. Harlem has its logic. What separates Rich isn't just how much he makes, but how he makes it. No wasted moves, no loud mouth. He's soft-spoken, always respectful, dressed like he stepped off a runway in Milan. Where others try to flex, Rich glides. There's a rumor that he once turned down a car just because it was too flashy. He tells a friend, "If they see you coming, they're already ready." By 16, he's not just making money, he's reinvesting it. He opens a small clothing shop near Malcolm X Boulevard, officially registered under a cousin's name. It's a front, sure, but it's also smart. Harlem cops ignore boutiques. They don't knock down doors for mannequins and linen. Then comes the cars. A red BMW first, then a white Benz. His taste is clean, never gaudy. No fur interiors, no gold rims, just smooth leather, mint condition, and engines that hum like lullabies. He never races, never shows off, but every kid who sees him drive past feels like they just saw a movie trailer for the life they want. There's a moment, around this time, when Rich walks out of his shop, sees a boy around 8 sitting on the curb, shoes falling apart, eating a melted popsicle. Rich doesn't say anything, just walks back in, comes out with a new pair of sneakers, hands them over. "Wear these like they're made of gold," he says, and keeps moving. The thing is, he remembers, because he used to be that boy. Harlem remembers too, but you probably won't survive this life. Not unless you know when to duck, when to run, and when to disappear. Rich hasn't learned that part yet. For now, he's still building, still riding that beautiful edge between king and cautionary tale. And Harlem? It watches like it always does, quietly, hungrily, waiting to see what happens when a boy gets too close to the throne. The money doesn't just come in now. It arrives in stacks, rubber-banded and heavy, like bricks of a future Rich isn't even sure he believes in yet. The boutique sees more foot traffic than inventory turnover, but nobody complains. Nobody asks questions. In Harlem, if your rent is paid and your shoes are clean, people let your stories be yours. Rich starts hiring runners. Teenagers mostly. Boys like he used to be. Quick on their feet, mouths shut, eyes always scanning the horizon. He teaches them small lessons. Never count cash in public, never lean on the same wall too long, never talk while chewing gum. His rules sound simple, but they become gospel. By 17, Rich isn't working for anyone. Not anymore. He is the network now. He knows which blocks run smooth, which corners pull heat, which stash houses need rotating. He buys burner apartments, one-bedroom walk-ups where no one lives but locks get changed monthly. One for product, one for cash, one just in case. His name starts to echo beyond Harlem, uptown, across the river, down to Brooklyn. Word spreads. Rich moves clean. Rich keeps his people paid. Rich doesn't panic, but that kind of attention, as always, cuts both ways. The streets begin watching more closely. Rivals take notes. Cops start whispering at precinct desks. And somewhere, among all that noise, someone else is rising. Enter Alpo Martinez. The first time Rich meets Alpo, it's not at a party or a business meeting. It's in the back of a burger joint on 7th Ave, both of them waiting for takeout. Rich is in a gray sweatsuit, headphones in, bouncing subtly to an Eric B. and Rakim beat. Alpo's dressed louder, bright red jacket, gold chain thick enough to tow a car. They recognize each other, nod, exchange names like men at the top of a mountain noticing another climber. The friendship that follows is unexpected but fast. Alpo is wild, funny, impulsive, unafraid to make a scene. Where Rich plays chess, Alpo plays dice. But there's mutual respect. They begin to work together, slowly, cautiously. Alpo brings in muscle and connections, especially down in Washington Heights. Rich brings organization, vision, and restraint. Together, they move more weight than most people realize. But it's not just the product, it's the style, the way they carry themselves, the way they make the hustle look less like survival and more like stardom. People start to look at them like gods in gold chains. They party, but not often. When they do, it's behind tinted windows and velvet ropes. Rich doesn't like the clubs much. Too loud, too many hands reaching for his attention. But he shows up enough to be seen. That's the game. Alpo, on the other hand, lives for the spotlight. He tells jokes, hands out bills like candy, flirts with waitresses until they forget their tables. He's magnetic, dangerous maybe, but magnetic. One night, in a smoky lounge in the Bronx, Alpo leans over and says, "Man, we could own this whole city if we wanted. You ever think about that?" Rich doesn't answer right away. He sips his drink, watches the reflection of the crowd in the window, and finally says, "I don't want to own it. I just don't want it owning me." That was Rich's thing. Always a step back, always holding a little piece of himself just out of reach. Still, the empire grows. Together with Ozzy Faison, an older, calculating player with his own corner of the kingdom, they start forming what people later call a dynasty. Fast cash, faster cars, and a network that stretches from Harlem into the Bronx and deep into Queens. And yet, the money never feels safe. It comes in too quickly to count and goes out just as fast. Cars need maintenance. Apartments need rotation. Lawyers need retainer fees. And family, especially Rich's, always needs something. He gives without hesitation. His mother, his cousins, even neighbors. He pays bills, buys groceries, pays tuition for kids who barely know his name. Aunt Janice warns him. Again, money without fences, she says, makes you a public pastor. Rich nods, but doesn't change. Deep down, he wants Harlem to win. He wants kids to see him and believe that something better is possible, even if he knows better himself. One day, walking past a group of school kids, Rich hears one of them say, "That's him. That's the king." He laughs. But inside, it scares him. Because kings fall, kings bleed, kings die. There's a quiet moment later that week. Rich, alone in his car, parked under a flickering street lamp on 145th. Rain tapping the windshield like soft knuckles. No music, just silence. He stares out at the city he helped build, wonders if he's building his own tomb. The city feels heavy that night, like it knows something he doesn't. The house Rich pays for isn't huge by mansion standards, but in Harlem, it feels like a castle. Brownstone bones, polished wood floors, and a leather couch that still smells like new. It's not where he lays his head every night. That changes often. But it's where he gathers. Family, friends. The ones who know not to ask questions when bags hit the floor or phones go unanswered for days. It's also where he keeps the books. Not the real books, of course. Just a coded ledger in a locked drawer, hidden beneath a stack of comic books he hasn't touched since he was 12. A system only he understands. Even Alpo isn't shown the full picture. That's not paranoia. That's survival. Rich's room has no posters, no trophies, just a clean bed, a small record player, and a photo of Darnell taped to the mirror. His little brother, 8 years younger, eyes wide with the same hunger Rich once had. The kid follows him around like a shadow, asking about the clothes, the cars, the cash. Rich tries to shield him, but Harlem doesn't raise blind children. "Darnell," he tells him once, "you don't want this. It's loud and lonely." But Darnell just grins and points to his shoes. New Jordans, courtesy of Rich. "Then why you smiling so much?" That's the thing. Rich smiles because he has to. Because it keeps the cold away. Because if he doesn't, he might crack. By now, his crew moves like clockwork. Runners, drivers, lookouts. Everyone has a job, and no one talks more than they need to. Every apartment has rules. No staying more than a night. No calls. No visitors. Product is weighed 3 times. Once when it arrives, once before packaging, and once before it hits the street. He pays well, better than most. That's why they stay loyal. That, and the feeling that they're part of something bigger. Rich makes them feel like they're building a brand, not just selling powder. Image matters, presentation matters. Even the stash bags are clean, sealed neatly, stacked like pastries in a boutique window. But image can't save you forever. Rich starts noticing unmarked cars. Not every day, not obviously, but often enough to tighten his chest when he rounds certain corners. A guy he knows gets picked up in Queens. Another vanishes after a deal in Spanish Harlem. And AZ, smart, always thinking 10 steps ahead, starts hinting at a slowdown. "We got too hot," AZ says over drinks one night. "Might be time to cool off." Rich sips his soda, not alcohol. He rarely touches it, and shrugs. "You trying to retire?" "I'm trying to breathe next year." They sit in silence for a while, both knowing the game doesn't allow smooth exits. It ends in one of three places: prison, coffin, or missing without a trace. Still, Rich doesn't slow. He pivots, opens more shops, puts more money into cash-heavy businesses, laundromats, convenience stores, even a hair salon. Anything that lets bills get rinsed clean in daylight. He hires a new driver, a quiet guy named Marcus, former cabbie, fast reflexes, no questions. The kind of man who knows how to keep both hands visible when stopped by cops, and exactly when to accelerate when they're not. It's Marcus who first spots the tail. A tan Buick that turns when they turn, stops when they stop, waits when they idle. Rich doesn't flinch. He just tells Marcus, "Next right, then left, then right again." Let's see if ghosts like patterns. They lose the car, for now, but the feeling lingers, like wet smoke in his lungs. At home, he checks on Darnell more often. Makes sure he's at school. Makes sure he's inside by sunset. Tells Aunt Janice to lock the doors tighter. She scolds him. Says he's bringing too much weight around the boy. He nods, but he doesn't promise anything. One night, Rich comes home to find Darnell asleep on the couch, a comic book spread open on his chest, a bag of chips unopened beside him. His face looks peaceful, untouched by Harlem's grip. Rich watches him for a long moment, unsure if he's proud or scared out of his mind, because deep down he knows kids don't stay kids here, not for long. There's a corner store on 138th Street Rich always stops at, knows the owner, buys candy for neighborhood kids sometimes, just enough to keep his face familiar, friendly, untouchable. One day, a kid outside asks, "You Rich Porter?" Rich pauses, smiles lightly. "Nah, I just dress like him." The kid laughs. "He must be rich. "Something like that," Rich replies, handing him $1 and walking away. He doesn't see the man in the car across the street. Doesn't notice the camera lens peeking between the cracked window and the door frame. The man isn't from Harlem. Doesn't smell like the block. He smells like polished leather and stale coffee. And he writes Rich's license plate number down without blinking. That's the problem with being a legend. Eventually, you become someone else's case file. Rich wakes before sunrise. No alarm, just instinct. A body trained to never let the world catch it sleeping too long. He showers in silence, water beating against his back like a reminder. This life moves fast, and rest is a luxury. By the time Harlem stirs, he's already dressed, keys in hand, and phone pressed to his ear. Every morning starts with a check-in, not just business, but people, where they are, who they're with, whether the vibe feels off. He doesn't bark orders. He doesn't have to. His name does the work. But names only hold weight if you reinforce them daily. He eats a plain bagel on the stoop of a shuttered storefront he's about to buy. 3 buildings down, a kid on a BMX nods once and keeps rolling. That's the neighborhood language. Brief, coded, never too much. The city looks beautiful at this hour. Soft light spilling over the skyline, pigeons hopping across fire escapes, the first buses sighing to life. But Rich sees the undercurrent. Every parked car might be a lookout. Every casual loiterer could be a scout. Harlem smiles with one side of its face. The other always watches. His phone buzzes. It's Alpo. Early calls usually mean opportunity or trouble. Today it's the former, at least on paper. Yo, I gotta connect, Alpo says. Dominicans out of Heights, moving weight like sandbags. They want in. Rich doesn't respond immediately. He doesn't like changes in supply. Too many variables, too many new mouths at the table. But Alpo is persuasive. I'm telling you, Rich, these guys ain't sloppy. Quiet, efficient, no flash. That last part is the only thing that makes Rich lean in. Quiet matters. Loud suppliers draw heat, so they agree to meet. The sit-down happens in a nondescript apartment above a check-cashing spot in Washington Heights. Dim lighting, thick accents, serious faces. The Dominicans lay out their terms. Consistent product, discreet drops, no undercutting. Rich listens closely, asks smart questions, doesn't flinch at the numbers. When they leave, Alpo claps him on the back. Told you they were solid. Solid doesn't mean safe, Rich replies, eyes scanning the street. Let's not get lazy. It's one of his rules. You never stop watching. The New Deal doubles their supply. For a few weeks, everything hums. Money pours in like rain through a broken roof. Rich invests half of it immediately. Real estate in Jersey under dummy names. A new bakery uptown. He even funds a youth basketball league. Gives out uniforms with no branding, no sponsors. Just black and gold. Harlem's colors. Alpo, meanwhile, begins to drift. Not away, exactly, but outward. He starts dealing with people Rich doesn't know. He gets flashier again. New cars, new girls, louder nights. Rich notices. He always notices. One evening, over a quiet dinner, Ozzy speaks up. You trust him? Rich doesn't answer right away. I trust his ambition, he finally says. That's not the same thing. I know. Still, they don't cut ties. Not yet. The money's too good. The streets are stable. And Harlem, against all odds, feels calm. But calm can be camouflage. One afternoon, Rich drives Darnell to school. Just the two of them. No security. No backup. Darnell chatters the whole way. About comic books, about sneakers, about a girl in his class named Keisha, who punched a boy for making fun of her braids. Rich laughs. Genuinely. It's one of the rare days he feels normal. Human. Not a king. Just a brother. A big one trying to keep the world at bay for a few more years. Before Darnell gets out, he turns and says, You ever gonna teach me how to drive that thing? Rich ruffles his hair. When you're taller than the wheel, we'll talk. Darnell bolts out, backpack bouncing, vanishing into the school's morning tide of kids. Rich watches until the door swallows him, then pulls away, unaware it's one of the last moments they'll ever share. That night, Aunt Janice calls. Darnell didn't come home. At first, Rich thinks it's a mistake. The kid probably stayed late. Maybe missed the bus. Maybe a friend's house. But his stomach tells him different. That cold, electric churn in the gut that only comes when something is deeply, irreversibly wrong. He starts making calls. Teachers, friends, the school security guard, nothing. Then the phone rings. No ID, just silence, then a voice. Calm, male, deep. We got the boy. You want him back? You'll listen. Rich doesn't blink, doesn't breathe. Don't call the cops. Don't play smart. You'll get instructions soon. Then a click. The line goes dead. Rich sits in his kitchen, phone still to his ear, as Harlem spins outside his window. A city alive with noise, but in that moment, all he hears is absence. He doesn't scream, doesn't cry. He stands up, sets the phone down gently, and walks into the night. The wind hits harder that night, like the city itself is angry, restless, maybe trying to warn him. Rich doesn't go home, doesn't answer calls. He just drives, aimlessly at first, down through the avenues, past the same bodegas and stoops where his name means royalty. But now, none of it feels like his. His mind replays Darnell's voice. That laugh. That question about driving. Rich tries not to think about what the boy is seeing now. Who he's with. What room he's locked in. How scared he must be. By midnight, he's in the Bronx. Alone. A parking lot behind a shuttered movie theater. The city hums with distant sirens and the occasional burst of bass from passing cars. But in his car, it's silent. He makes one call. To Alpo. Darnell's missing. A pause on the line. Then, "What you mean missing?" "Taken. I got the call. They got him." Alpo swears under his breath. Says he'll make calls. Says not to worry. Rich ends the call without replying. He doesn't trust anyone now. Back in Harlem, word begins to trickle. The block moves like it always does. Cars creeping slow, teens tossing dice, grandmothers yelling from windows. But beneath it, something changes. Rich isn't smiling. His runners move tighter. The shop windows get darker. Even the music feels lower, like the volume knob got turned down out of respect or fear. Then comes the second call. Different voice, still calm. "You want the kid back? Bring $500,000. No tricks. You got 2 days." The line goes dead again. Rich doesn't hesitate. He liquidates what he needs to. Sells a car. Closes shop for the week. Moves money from safe houses. Hands cash over to his most trusted crew. But the money's not the hard part. It's the silence that follows. No further calls. No meeting point. No follow-up. Just nothing. Rich waits. For hours, then days. And then, one morning, a whisper reaches him. Someone from the Bronx. A body's been found in a nearby park. Young. Male. Wrapped in sheets. He drives there himself. No sirens. No convoy. Just him. Hands gripping the wheel like it's the only thing holding him together. Police are already there. Reporters circle like vultures. He doesn't get too close. Doesn't need to. A detective looks at him with pity. Real human pity. That's when he knows. Later, in a room with dull lighting and the hum of a cheap fan, they confirm what he already felt in his bones. It's Darnell. The boy is gone. 9 years old, shot once in the head, wrapped in a plastic sheet like yesterday's trash. There are no words for that. Nothing useful. Nothing that makes the air easier to breathe. Rich goes home, sits on the edge of his bed, and stares at the floor for hours. Aunt Janice tries to talk to him. Neighbors bring food. Candles show up on his stoop. But he doesn't move. Not for a long time. The funeral is a blur. Closed casket. Too many flowers. Too many reporters outside pretending to mourn with cameras. Inside the church, the silence is suffocating. Harlem's toughest men wipe their eyes and try not to make noise. One little boy walks up to the altar and places a single toy car next to the casket. No words. Just that. Rich doesn't speak. Not at the podium. Not after. He sits in the front row with his head bowed, suit sharp, face unreadable. A king at war with the air itself. That night, after everyone leaves, he walks through Harlem alone. The city doesn't recognize him now. He stops by the schoolyard where Darnell used to play. Swings creak in the breeze. The chain-link fence rattles softly, like it's trying to speak. He stands there for a long time. Long enough for morning to threaten the horizon. And then something shifts. Rich Porter dies that night. Not physically, not yet. But the man who smiled, the man who believed in Harlem, who gave out sneakers and candy and paid school fees for kids who weren't his, that man disappears. What remains is quieter, colder, sharper. He calls in his closest people. No one else. Ozzy, a few lieutenants. Not Alpo. He lays it out clean. No more games. We move different now. Tighter, smarter, no errors. The room listens like it's church. No one speaks until spoken to. No one questions the new rules. The next few days move fast. A known associate vanishes. Rumors say he was the one who gave up Darnell's location. Another man is found tied to a chair in a shuttered basement in Queens. Alive. Barely. He doesn't talk again for months. Rich never confirms any of it. He doesn't have to, because the streets know, and the streets start changing again. Not louder, not more violent, just colder. Like winter came early and decided to stay. The air in Harlem doesn't breathe the same anymore. It holds its breath around Rich. Conversation's quiet when he enters a room. People still nod, still smile, but with something else behind their eyes now. Not just respect. Caution. Like they're standing too close to something sharp. He notices. He's always noticed. The shift isn't just emotional, it's tactical. Rich reconfigures the entire operation. No more open corners, no more flashy drop-offs. He pulls back his reach, streamlines the network, reduces the number of people touching the product. From supply to street, it's all reduced to shadows and silence. He starts carrying himself differently too. Still clean, still sharp, but colder. Eyes that used to laugh now scan. Words that used to charm now weigh. It's the difference between sunlight and frostbite. And the money? It still comes in. Maybe even more now. Fear has a way of making things efficient. Alpo notices the change, tries to joke his way around it. "You acting like a ghost lately," he says one night over Chinese takeout in a dim apartment above 116th. Rich barely looks up. Ghosts don't get shot in the back. Alpo raises an eyebrow, chuckles, but doesn't push. That's been the pattern lately. Alpo pushing, Rich pulling away. Their friendship, once electric, now hums like a bad wire in the wall. Still functioning, but you know something's burning inside. The city outside continues its rhythm. Cabs honk, fire escapes rattle, music bleeds from windows. But for Rich, everything sounds like a warning. He starts sleeping less. 4 hours maybe. Gun within reach. 2 phones always charged. He keeps a bag packed. Cash, clothes, ID under another name. Just in case. Paranoia? Maybe. But when your 9-year-old brother gets kidnapped and murdered for ransom, paranoia feels like insurance. Easy offers an out. "We could walk," he says one night. "Cash out. Go somewhere warm. Cuba, Jamaica. Start new." Rich stares at his drink. Start what? A life. I already started it. This is it. It's not defeat. It's clarity. Because Rich knows now, he's not building a future. He's maintaining an illusion. Every day bought is borrowed, but if he's going down, it's on his feet. Still, he makes quiet moves. Starts shifting assets. Pays off people who don't even know they've been bought. Creates exit paths, not for himself, but for those who might outlive him. He gives Aunt Janice a bundle of cash and a simple instruction. When it gets cold, take a bus and don't look back. She doesn't ask questions. She never has. Then, something unexpected. Alpo starts acting different. Nicer, softer. He brings food over. Offers to help with drops he normally avoids. Mentions his own family. His kid, his girl. Tries to reminisce. Rich listens. But a sliver of doubt coils inside him, because he knows what guilt looks like. He's worn that face too. Then comes the drop in Spanish Harlem. Routine, mid-afternoon, nothing flashy. Alpo offers to ride with him. Just like old times, he says. Rich hesitates, then nods. The drive is quiet at first. Then Alpo starts talking. About the past. About the block where they met. About the burger joint where they laughed over bad fries and future plans. Rich listens, but not really. His eyes are on the mirrors, on the skyline, on the spaces between buildings. There's a moment, a red light. Alpo turns to him. You ever think about what comes next? Rich says nothing. The light turns green. He keeps driving. Later that week, word reaches Rich's ears. Rumors. Whispers from the Bronx. People say Alpo's been seen with people he shouldn't be seen with. Faces from downtown. From precincts. Cops. Rich doesn't react outwardly. Doesn't slam a fist or yell or confront. He just adds it to the file in his head. And files like that don't get dusty. He's not sure what's real yet, but he knows this. Harlem doesn't lie. It murmurs. And when it murmurs your name, something's already moving behind you. He tightens the circle further. Cuts ties. Switches cars. Stops taking certain calls. He tells Marcus to change routes daily. No routine. No rhythm. Never be predictable, he says. Not even to me. Then, on a Sunday morning, a message arrives. A simple envelope slid under the boutique door. Inside, no words, just a Polaroid. Darnell, from months ago, alive, tied to a chair, eyes wide, terrified. Rich stares at it for a long time. Not because he didn't know, but because someone kept it. Because someone waited. Because someone wanted him to see it. Now, the message is clear. It was personal. He doesn't cry, doesn't punch a wall. He folds the photo, places it in his wallet, and walks out the back door. He doesn't come home for 2 days. When he does, there's a look in his eyes Harlem hasn't seen before. A finality, like something inside him has stopped asking questions, because he already knows the answer. Rich stops calling Alpo. No confrontations. No threats, just space. A silence loud enough to shake the room without raising a voice. Harlem feels it. The people who orbit them feel it too. The air between their names grows heavier by the day, like a storm that hasn't broken yet, but everyone keeps checking the sky. And Alpo? He notices. He starts popping up more, uninvited, unscheduled. Quick visits. Casually timed drive-bys, always smiling, always cracking jokes, trying to mend something without admitting it's broken. Rich lets him talk, but he doesn't say much back. Instead, he moves. Quietly, precisely. He has Marcus tail Alpo's car for a week, notes who he meets, where he goes. Patterns start to emerge. Too many meetings in the Bronx. Too many faces Rich doesn't recognize. And one name that keeps coming up in whispers. A low-level Fed who's known to cut deals for information that draws blood. Rich doesn't accuse. He doesn't even confirm. He just files it all away. Because Harlem doesn't run on truth. It runs on perception. And perception is shifting. People who used to move with Alpo now hesitate. Runners get scarce. Drop points change without warning. Word gets back to Rich that one of his couriers refused a job because it smelled like a setup. When Rich asks why, the courier shrugs. Just felt off. Like someone knew I'd be there. That's all it takes. One chill in the air. One flicker of doubt. He recalls something Aunt Janice used to say. When the dog stops barking, it's not peace. It's the predator getting closer. Still, Rich doesn't lash out. He tightens, refines, steps back. Begins to operate like he's already halfway gone. He rents a storage unit under a fake name in Newark. Inside, cash, clean clothes, new IDs, a prepaid cell phone. Exit plan. But even with a door cracked open behind him, he doesn't leave. Not yet, because Harlem still belongs to him, and leaving means surrendering the myth. He spends more time alone now. Drives without a destination. Eats in diners where no one knows his face. thinks about Darnell more than he admits. Sometimes, in the early morning, he drives past the school just to see the gate, just to watch the kids line up, full of noise and softness, like Darnell used to be. Before everything turned, that innocence feels like another planet now. A place he can't return to, but still orbits. Then, the whispers turn sharp. Someone inside the organization, someone deep, is moving behind his back. He doesn't flinch, just listens. A name surfaces. A man close to Alpo, a mutual. Rich doesn't make a scene. He invites the man to dinner. Casual, calm. They sit in a dim booth of a quiet restaurant. Red leather seats, a flickering candle between them. Rich doesn't smile much anymore, but tonight he makes an exception. Soft, controlled. "I've been hearing stories," he says, voice smooth like syrup sliding off a knife. The man laughs nervously. "You know people talk, Rich. Half of what they say." Rich cuts in. Still polite, still cold. "I don't care about half." Silence stretches. "You working with Alpo on the side?" Rich asks. The man shifts in his seat. "Nah, I see him, yeah, but it's not like that." Rich leans forward just slightly, enough to pull the shadows in around his eyes. "Then tell me what it's like." The man fumbles, sweats, tries to explain. Rich listens, then stands, leaves $100 bill on the table, and walks out. No threats, no violence, just departure. The man leaves Harlem 3 days later. Some say he moved to Philly. Others say he vanished entirely. Rich never follows up. He doesn't need to, because the message has already been delivered. Indirect, but surgical. Even Alpo feels it. He tries to reach out again. Leaves a voicemail. "We should talk, man. Too much history between us for silence." Rich deletes it without playing the second half. Then comes the drive. A simple errand. A drop to check on a storefront in the Bronx. Marcus drives. Rich in the passenger seat. Windows cracked. Music low. Everything seems routine, until it doesn't. They hit a red light. A black SUV pulls alongside. Too clean, too fast, and Rich. He knows before the window even rolls down. His hand moves, but not fast enough. 2 pops. Shattered glass. A scream from somewhere distant. Marcus floors it. Tires screech. The SUV doesn't follow. They make it back to Harlem. Rich is bleeding. Shoulder. Ribs. Not fatal, but a message. He says nothing as Marcus panics. Trying to call someone. Trying to get to a hospital. Rich just stares out the window. "Don't stop the car," he says finally. "Just drive until it's morning." That night, bandaged and silent, he stands on his balcony and looks out over Harlem. The city he built, the kingdom he ruled, and now, the battlefield where his name is being tested. But if they think he's running, they don't know Rich Porter. Not yet. By morning, Rich is back on his feet. Painkillers dull the sting, but not the message. Getting shot, especially in the daylight, especially in traffic, means one thing. Someone wants to be seen sending that warning. Someone wants Harlem to notice. And Harlem does. The corners buzz. Dealers talk quieter. People who used to smile now avert their gaze. The city has always respected Rich, but now it fears what's next. Fear, Rich knows, is a different kind of power. Harder to maintain, easier to lose control of. He tightens his circle even more. Only Ozzy and Marcus stay close. Everyone else, runners, lieutenants, even family, is put at arm's length for their safety. And his own, Marcus offers to step away. "They might come for me next." Rich shakes his head. "You didn't flinch. That means something. In this world, loyalty is the last currency that isn't counterfeit." Meanwhile, Alpo's silence grows suspicious. No visits, no calls, just distance, and that absence feels louder than any gunshot. Rich doesn't react, not publicly, but he starts building a profile. He meets with people he doesn't trust, in rooms with no windows. He listens more than he speaks. His questions are quiet, but his presence isn't. Every room he enters dims a little. Even the air thickens, like the city is holding its breath. There's a map on his table now. Harlem to the Bronx, red marks where whispers turn to warnings, blue ones for people who vanished. It's not just paranoia, it's math, and the numbers are stacking up wrong. AZ notices the shift. "You're starting to look like him," he says one night, meaning Alpo. Rich doesn't answer. He just lowers his glass, because he knows the longer you stay in the game, the more the mirror starts lying. Until one day, you look at your reflection and see your enemy's eyes. But stepping out, that still isn't an option. Not yet. Especially not when a rumor surfaces, a federal case being built. Not just against low-level runners. This one's bigger. Multi-state, cross-agency. And it has names. Real names. People too high up to usually make lists. And Rich Porter is one of them. At least, according to the whispers. He doesn't panic. He plans. He moves a second exit bag to an address in Westchester under a dead man's name, just in case the first escape burns. He reroutes his communications. Burner phones change weekly. Laptops get wiped daily. He stops touching product directly, but it's not enough. He knows it, because Harlem is closing in. And there's something about the silence that wraps around his name now. It's not respect. It's dread, and still, no word from Alpo. Then, a mutual contact breaks the quiet. AZ's cousin, trusted, smart. He says he heard something, that Alpo's been talking to someone who wears a badge, that there are tapes, meetings, that Alpo might be preparing for the end by rewriting the story, making himself the misunderstood one, the survivor, the necessary villain. "And you?" the cousin says. "You're the sacrifice." Rich doesn't respond, not at first. Then he asks, "You believe that?" The cousin doesn't answer, because in Harlem, silence is often the truest yes. That night, Rich writes a list, not of names, not of debts, but of memories, moments that still feel warm. Darnell's laughter at the arcade, Aunt Janice humming over a stove, his first pair of real sneakers, that one sunset on 145th, where everything felt still. He folds the list, slides it behind the mirror, just in case, because deep down, Rich knows this story is shifting. And when it does, when the lights flicker and the wheels start spinning in the dark, it won't be some grand movie scene betrayal. It'll be quieter, more surgical, done by someone close enough to know exactly where to strike. He starts refusing ride-alongs. Only Marcus drives now. He stops taking cash drops personally. He doesn't attend meetings unless they're on his terms. And most of all, he stops pretending to believe in redemption. Because in Harlem, stories don't end with escape. They end with silence. Then, late one night, his phone rings. Blocked number. He picks up. "Rich, it's me, Alpo." The voice is steady, smooth, too smooth. "We should talk." There's a lot being said. People stirring stuff. Rich closes his eyes. "Yeah, we should talk." They agree to meet. Private, no entourages. Neutral ground. Rich gives the address. Not a place of power. Just a parking lot near the river, where city lights can't quite reach. When the call ends, Rich doesn't move. He just sits in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, Harlem feels small. Like a box with no lid. The river air is colder than usual. It curls around Rich's collar as he stands alone near the edge of the lot. The Hudson stretching wide behind him like a promise no one's kept. The streetlights nearby buzz, weak and tired, casting more shadow than glow. It's the kind of place where things disappear, and nobody asks where they went. Rich doesn't bring a gun, not because he trusts Alpo, because he already made peace with what might come. He checks his watch. 10 minutes early. That's intentional. He always arrives first, always sees who's watching, who's waiting. Tonight, no cars, no tails, just a quiet breeze that smells faintly of oil and rust. Then he hears it. Tires on gravel, headlights off, engine low. A black Acura rolls in and parks a few yards away. Alpo steps out slowly, hands visible. No smile this time. No chains, no jokes. Just two men dressed in quiet, each carrying the full weight of every street they ever ruled. They nod at each other. No handshake. Just space. You picked a weird spot, Alpo says, looking around. Neutral ground, Rich replies. No echoes here. Alpo chuckles, more out of reflex than humor. You think I'd come at you sideways? I think you already did. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's full of old laughs, old memories, old warnings they never listened to. Full of Darnell, of missed calls, of things that never got said when there was still time. Alpo breaks first. Look, man, I don't know what you've heard. I heard you were talking to people who don't wear sneakers. Rich interrupts. Calm. Cold. Alpo shifts. It's not like that. You know how this works. They pick someone. Squeeze them. Make them look like they're folding even when they ain't. Rich tilts his head. So you're saying it's all smoke? Alpo shrugs. I'm saying, don't believe everything you hear. Rich nods once. And what about what I see? Alpo doesn't answer, and in that moment, Rich knows, because liars talk in circles. Friends face forward. He doesn't lash out, doesn't accuse. He just steps back. I called you here because I wanted to see, he says. See if the man I started with is still standing there. And I see the man who finished the story without me. That lands. Alpo looks away, toward the river. Things got messy, he murmurs. No, Rich says. Things got clear. Then, without another word, he turns and walks back to his car. He doesn't check to see if Alpo follows. Doesn't look back. That chapter is closed. In Harlem, people sense the fallout immediately. The alliance is done. Split right down the middle like a cracked mirror. Some try to stay neutral. Most choose sides. And the streets, hungry for change, start shifting fast. Product gets rerouted. Corners change hands. Even the whispers feel louder. Like everyone knows something's about to break. They just don't know where. Rich keeps moving, quiet, composed, focused. But he knows he's bleeding time. The feds are circling tighter. One of his stash spots gets raided in Brooklyn, clean, thankfully, but too close for comfort. A contact tips him off. There's a sealed indictment coming. His name is near the top. That's when he decides. The escape plan isn't just a backup now. It's the next move. He makes arrangements. Small things. Aunt Janice gets a prepaid card with enough money to vanish comfortably. Marcus is handed keys to a safe house. Azy, ever the thinker, is told nothing, but watches everything with eyes that understand. Rich sets a date. 2 weeks. He'll be gone before the city wakes up. But Harlem never lets go so easily, because on a cold December morning, just 6 days before his exit, Rich goes missing. No warning, no goodbye. He leaves the boutique at 8:12 a.m. to check on a delivery. He never comes home. The hours pass. Aunt Janice calls. Marcus drives every block he can think of. No answers. No sightings. No return. Then, a whisper from the Bronx. A body in a car. Shot. Left on the side of the road like nothing. Like trash. It's Rich. Dead at 25. A king brought down not by war or rebellion, but silence. The city freezes. For a full day, Harlem barely breathes. Candles appear on sidewalks. Kids cry. Men stare blankly. Mothers pull sons inside early. And Alpo? He disappears too. No words, no funeral speech, no statement. Just gone. The rumors flood in. Alpo did it. He was jealous. He was scared. He needed a clean slate before cutting a deal. Many people still think that Rich was planning to walk away, and that Alpo killed him to protect his own escape route. So what do you think? Because in Harlem, truth is flexible. But betrayal? Betrayal leaves a scar everyone can see. The car was a beige Lincoln. Nothing flashy. Just another quiet ride parked near Gun Hill Road in the Bronx. Windows tinted. Engine cold. The kind of vehicle you might pass without a second thought. But inside, Rich Porter was slumped in the passenger seat, head tilted, a small, dark bloom on his coat. No heartbeat left to call back. No wallet, no phone. Just silence. When the police arrived, they cordoned it off quickly. News hadn't hit yet, but the tension in the air was sharp enough to taste. A few bystanders whispered names, tentative, scared. Then someone said it out loud. "It's Rich," and Harlem changed. Within hours, the block felt like it was holding its breath. People gathered not to mourn, but to understand, to make sense. But the streets didn't offer answers, only theories. And most of those pointed in one direction. Alpo. He wasn't at the scene. He wasn't in Harlem. He wasn't picking up calls. And that absence? It said more than any statement ever could. Some said it was business. That Alpo feared Rich might bring heat. That federal pressure had made him paranoid. That a deal had already been struck behind closed doors. Others said it was personal. That Darnell's death had created a fracture that could never heal. That Alpo felt Rich's silence like a slow bleed. That jealousy, guilt, and survival danced too close together. Then there were the old-timers, the men on stoops who smoked in silence and spoke in parables. "Don't matter why," one of them muttered. "Just matters that the crown ain't safe on no one's head." The funeral came fast, a closed casket, the same way Darnell had left. Aunt Janice sat still on the front pew, her hands folded so tight her knuckles turned white. She didn't cry in public, never had. But her eyes, those said everything. People packed the church. More stood outside. Young men in leather coats and gold chains lined the sidewalk, their heads bowed, their mouths shut. No music, no speeches that mattered, just a name spoken softly, a myth suddenly mortal. And Harlem, once again, orphaned by its own ambition. After the service, the whispers grew louder. Az disappeared from view. Some said he left town. Others claimed he buried himself in business, swearing off the street for good. Either way, he vanished without noise. Perhaps the smartest move anyone made that year. Alpo? He surfaced months later. Not in Harlem, not even in New York. He was in D.C., then Virginia, then reportedly in federal custody. Eventually, he talked. And in talking, he rewrote the story, at least the one he wanted to be remembered. He said Rich was greedy, that Rich was reckless, that he had to make a move before being outed himself. To many, it felt like a confession laced with justification, a remix of reality. To others, it was confirmation of what they'd already believed, that no bond survives the pressure of power when the foundation is ambition and the ceiling is fear. The story of Rich Porter spread in every direction, in rap lyrics, in underground documentaries, in whispered tales from barbershops and playgrounds. He became a symbol, not just of wealth or street fame or youthful arrogance, but of loss, of what happens when you rise too fast in a city that doesn't let you land safely. And Darnell, he became the ghost people talked about in lower voices, a reminder that no amount of money can buy back innocence, that the streets don't care how old you are, only how useful you might be, or how valuable your life is to someone else's leverage. Years passed. Harlem changed. Boutiques gave way to franchises. Brownstones got new paint. Tourists walked blocks that once whispered with danger. But even in the gentrified hum of progress, some names still rang out when the sun dipped low. Rich Porter, Darnell Porter, two boys taken by a system that made kings of children and legends of their graves. A generation later, a young man walks through Harlem in Timberlands and a puffy coat, nodding at murals and asking his uncle who the face on the wall is. "That's Rich," the uncle says. "Used to run this place before you were born." Was he famous? He was something. That's the thing about Rich. He wasn't built to last. He was built to burn bright, to show Harlem, if only for a while, that power, charisma, and control could live in one man, and then to show that even that man could fall. No matter how careful, no matter how beloved, no matter how sharp, the streets never forget, but they rarely forgive. And the saddest part? Rich might have walked away. He might have built something different. He might have even had peace. But peace doesn't sell on corners. Peace doesn't get your name remembered. Only pain does that. And Rich Porter? His name is eternal, because his ending made sure of it. In the weeks that followed Rich's death, Harlem changed tempo. Not loudly, not all at once, but subtly. Like a song slowing a beat, like a crowd dispersing after the headliner never shows. The corner's still filled, but the faces changed. New names, new rules. The ones who once mimicked Rich's walk now moved different. Lower to the ground, less shine, more eyes in the back of their heads. Because if a man like Rich Porter could vanish, anyone could. The boutique closed, windows boarded. A faded sign above the door flapped in the wind. No one dared break in. Even the thieves paid respect in silence. It sat empty for months, then years, as if Harlem itself didn't know how to repurpose a shrine. Inside, dust settled over untouched ledgers and half-unpacked boxes. A small, framed photo of Darnell remained on the counter, a smile behind the glass, frozen forever. Aunt Janice moved shortly after. Took nothing with her but a bag and her silence. Neighbors say she still lights a candle on the same day every year, wherever she ends up. No one asks questions. Some wounds are better left unprodded. Meanwhile, Alpo's story twisted. He resurfaced in headlines. He testified. He named names, claimed he killed Rich over business, claimed it wasn't personal. But everyone in Harlem knew better, because the only thing worse than betrayal is betrayal without remorse. People watched those interviews with clenched jaws. They turned off the screen halfway through. They didn't want his explanation. They wanted their myth back. But myths, once broken, don't rebuild. They haunt. Rich became a cautionary tale and a symbol, all in one. His image lived on, in grainy newspaper clippings, in barbershop murals, in whispered warnings to young hustlers with fast dreams. Don't get too bright. Don't get too bold. And whatever you do, don't trust too much. For those who remembered, he was the boy who brought Harlem together. For a moment. Who handed out money on Thanksgiving. Who tipped delivery kids more than their orders. Who pulled friends out of jail before they had time to call their mothers. And who still died alone in a parked car. AZ never returned to the street. He rebuilt his life away from the noise. Quiet businesses, community work, books, talks. His name became educational, no longer feared. He spoke about legacy, about what it costs to be young and bulletproof, about how empires built on trauma crumble under the weight of regret. And even he, in interviews years later, would pause when Rich's name came up. "I've seen kings fall," he'd say. But Rich wasn't just a king. He was the hope behind the crown. Because that's what people miss most. Not just the power, not just the wealth. The hope, the idea that a kid from Harlem could rise, run, and maybe, just maybe, survive it all. There's a mural on 145th now. It's not official. Painted by a teenager with borrowed paint and a vision. Rich's face, half shadow, half smile. Darnell's image beside him, smaller, in innocence. Someone wrote beneath it, "Legends don't die, they warn. It gets painted over every few months by the city. And every few months it returns. No plaque, no flowers, just paint and memory." Some nights, old heads still sit on stoops and tell stories. They talk about the boy with the clean sneakers and the sharper mind. About the brother who gave more than he had. About the man who never got to be just a man. Only a symbol. And Harlem listens, even now, with its shiny condos and wine bars. Even now, it still listens. Because this city forgets noise. but it remembers echoes. And Rich Porter's, that echo still walks the avenues after dark, still leans on corners, still whispers into the ears of kids holding dreams too big for their pockets. Be careful, it says. Even kings bleed. By the early 2000s, Rich Porter had become more myth than memory. He lived on in verses and samples, ghost notes behind hip-hop tracks, name drops in songs by men who were still in diapers when he ruled Harlem. For the new generation, he was a blueprint wrapped in caution tape. An image, Rolex, BMW, smile sharp as razors, but stripped of the pain that carved it. His story got simplified. Just another hustler who flew too close to the sun. But for those who were there, who felt the weight of that era in real time, Rich was something else entirely. He was the heartbeat of Harlem when the city had forgotten how to dream. And even in death, he taught the block a lesson. That fame on the street isn't a crown. It's a target. That loyalty spoken too loudly invites betrayal. That trust is expensive, and betrayal, that's always on clearance. Still, young ones kept chasing the image, kept buying silk shirts and icy chains, thinking the style was the story. But they missed the part where Rich came home at night and sat in silence, where his eyes stopped blinking when Darnell didn't come home, where the money piled higher and the sleep got thinner. That part didn't make it into the songs. That part made it into the grave. And Alpo? His story didn't end in silence. Years later, after time inside and witness protection and attempts at reinvention, he returned to Harlem like a man trying to haunt the house he helped burn down. Drove the streets again. Showed up in places too familiar, as if the city had forgotten. But Harlem doesn't forget. One night in 2021, Alpo Martinez was shot and killed on the same streets he once called home. To some, it was justice, delayed, but served. To others, just another chapter in a never-ending cycle of retribution and regret. Nobody threw a parade. Nobody painted a mural. They just swept the street and moved on. Because even revenge loses its flavor when stretched out over decades. Back in Harlem, the boutique where Rich once ran his empire quietly reopened. As a coffee shop, then a sneaker store, then a wellness center. But some say, if you walk past it at the right hour, maybe just before dawn, you can still feel something in the air. Not fear, not sadness, just presence, like the memory of a man who once made the block believe it could be more. A man who played the game too well to lose, but too long to survive. A man who kept his brother's photo taped to his mirror until the day he died. Sometimes a young hustler will ask an older head, was Rich really all that? And the answer is always the same. Yeah, he was that. But being that, it ain't free, because Rich didn't just sell cocaine. He sold belief in control, in style, in invincibility. And when that belief shattered, it sent cracks across Harlem that still haven't fully healed. In the decades since, others have tried to fill the space he left. None lasted. None carried the same balance of fear and favor, warmth and steel. Rich moved like jazz. Fast, improvisational, dangerous, beautiful. You couldn't copy it. You could only get caught trying. Aunt Janice, if she's still alive, probably lives quiet now. Maybe in Jersey. Maybe further. Far from the corners that whispered her nephew's name for years. She doesn't talk to cameras. Doesn't give interviews. Doesn't write memoirs. But every November, a candle shows up on the old stoop. White, unmarked, and no one touches it. Because Harlem knows, it's not just for Rich, it's for Darnell, for the days before it all cracked, for the dream that was never built to last, but still made people believe, if only for a moment. And that's the final legacy of Rich Porter. Not the cars, not the cash, not even the betrayal, but the belief, the moment he gave Harlem a mirror, and for once, it saw a king, even if the reflection didn't last. Time dulled the sharpness of Rich Porter's legend, but it never erased him. As Harlem shifted and rebranded, as gentrification painted over the past with pastel storefronts and polished sidewalks, Rich remained embedded in its bones. His name, his story, still moved quietly through the alleyways and barbershops, still carried weight in hushed conversations between those who remembered what it felt like when the streets trembled at a single man's presence, and not just for how he moved, but for how he made people feel, seen, protected, inspired, even if just for a moment. Every now and then, a podcast or documentary would surface, some slick-titled story of the Harlem drug lords, or the rise and fall of the 80s kings. Rich's name always made the list, usually third or fourth, often condensed to a sound bite. He was young, flashy, ambitious, dead too soon, but the truth, the full, unfiltered pulse of who he was, couldn't be fit into a documentary runtime or a verse on vinyl. He wasn't just a product of his environment. He was a reflection of it, a response to its silence, an answer to the system's indifference. When opportunity slammed its doors, Rich kicked them open. When the economy abandoned his block, he built one of his own. And when the city forgot about Harlem, Rich reminded it, with swagger, with structure, with something that almost looked like hope. It wasn't clean, it wasn't legal, but it was real, and people followed him for that reason alone. In every generation, Harlem gets a new crop of dreamers, boys with heavy eyes and fast feet who learn early how to count money before they can memorize state capitals. They still speak Rich's name, still wear his style without knowing the weight of it, still chase the image without reading the warning label. And sometimes someone older steps in. Don't chase ghosts, they say. He died trying to keep what you're trying to build. But most don't listen, because ambition makes people deaf. The boutique was eventually torn down, replaced by a sleek glass building. Co-working spaces, yoga studios, overpriced juice bars. The ground that once carried whispers of deals now echoed with casual meetings and startup chatter. But a few original bricks remained, embedded in the back alley wall, worn, cracked, untouched by renovation. Someone spray-painted over them one night, just 4 letters, R-I-C-H. The city tried painting over it 3 times. It kept coming back. Maybe the paint was defiant. Maybe the wall remembered. Marcus, the driver who once gripped the wheel through gunfire and silence, moved away. Started a mechanic shop in Atlanta. He doesn't talk about that time unless he's asked. Even then, he chooses his words carefully. Rich, he says once, while replacing a carburetor. Smartest man I ever knew. Most tired, too. People think kings sleep well. They don't. They just pretend better than the rest. He keeps one photo on the wall of his office. No frame. Just tacked up. A grainy shot of Rich standing beside the red BMW. Head turned halfway to the camera, mid-smile, like he wasn't even posing. Just existing. And in that stillness, he looks unstoppable. That's how Marcus wants to remember him. Not the body in the Lincoln, not the news headlines, but that quiet moment before everything slipped. There's a lingering debate in Harlem still. What if Rich had made it out? Some say he would have built a legal empire, opened a string of real businesses, gone international, become untouchable. Others argue he was already too deep, that the weight of the past would have dragged him under eventually, even on clean soil. Many people still think that if Darnell had lived, Rich would have left the game, that he'd have walked away, handed the keys to someone else, and started over somewhere warmer, quieter, safer. So what do you think? Could a man like Rich really walk away from the world that crowned him? Or was he always destined to wear a crown made of glass? These aren't just questions about one man. They're questions Harlem asks itself, over and over again. Each time another bright-eyed hustler flashes too fast. Each time another funeral line wraps around a city block. Each time another mural fades beneath the sun. And still they chase. Still they run. Still they say his name like a prayer. Rich, the king who didn't get old. The blueprint that came with no eraser. The legend who left Harlem forever asking, was it worth it? There's a stretch of 7th Avenue between 135th and 145th where time bends a little, where the buildings still carry the residue of an era long past. Rusted security gates, cracked stoops, faded graffiti that refuses to be washed away. That's where Rich Porter used to walk like he owned gravity, where tires slowed down for him, where heads turned before his name even needed to be spoken. And decades later, that stretch still remembers him, not because of plaques, not because of government honors, but because memory in Harlem is oral, lived, tattooed into corner culture and carried in glances. The man may be gone, but the atmosphere he created, the tempo, the tension, the dream, it lingers. An old woman who used to run a food cart near the corner of 139th still keeps a framed clipping under her counter. Just his face, no headline. He used to nod at me, she once told someone. Never asked for a discount. That's how I know he was raised right, even if he fell wrong. That's the thing about Rich. He didn't just move weight. He moved people. He had presence before he had power. And that presence, more than the numbers, more than the money, is what turned him into a symbol. But symbols are dangerous, because once people believe in one, they'll sacrifice anything to protect the idea, even the person behind it. Rich's crew never quite recovered. Those who didn't flip got low. Those who didn't run got easy, faded out. Not into fear, but into purpose. He started speaking, writing, mentoring, trying to turn a life that once burned so bright into a lantern for those still navigating the dark. He never disrespected Rich's memory, but he told the truth. This life looks sweet from the outside, he once said, but once you're inside, everything's sugar-coated cyanide. The new generation didn't always listen. The music still plays. The gold chains still gleam. The videos still reenact scenes they never lived. And Rich still gets name-dropped, like a legend, like a martyr, like a blueprint. But no one talks about how lonely he looked near the end, how his circle shrank to shadows, how silence became his closest companion. There are no songs about that part, no hooks about the days when the paranoia drowned out the money, when the phone ringing felt like a gun cocking, when every parked car looked like a funeral waiting for a passenger. He carried that burden alone, and that, perhaps, is the clearest mark of a king in the underworld. Not just how many follow you, but how heavy your crown feels when no one is watching. Marcus once said, "There were nights I drove him around and he didn't say a word, just stared out the window like he was already gone." That was before the betrayal, before the shots, before the parking lot. Rich wasn't naive. He knew the odds, knew the rules, knew that Harlem doesn't give you long runs, just loud ones. But still, he thought he could beat it. And for a while he did. He brought structure to chaos, brought silence to noisy corners, brought vision to a game built on reaction. He was never the loudest, never the wildest. He was the one people leaned toward when things got real. And in the end, that's why his death echoed so violently. Because if even Rich could fall, what hope did the rest have? That's why kids today still hear the story like folklore, like a bedtime tale with no real bedtime, no peace at the end, just a lesson wrapped in tragedy. Don't trust too easily, don't rise too fast, and if you do, make sure the man riding beside you ain't already writing your eulogy. The saddest part? Rich didn't need to die that day. He had options, he had outs, but he stayed, because some part of him believed that loyalty still meant something, that friendship could still protect you, that the street code he helped uphold would do the same for him. It didn't, and that's why his name is both warning and war cry. When it's said on a block today, it's not just nostalgia. It's a flare, a marker, a reminder that Harlem doesn't owe you anything, even if you gave it everything. It's late October in Harlem. The wind rolls through the avenues in steady bursts, rattling awnings and sweeping up old flyers from light poles, most of them faded reminders of lost people, lost parties, and lives gone sideways. Somewhere near 142nd Street, someone lights a candle on a stoop. No fanfare, no music, just a flicker that dares to burn through the chill. They say it's for Rich. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone understands. This night always hits different. It's the anniversary, not of his birth, not even of his death, but of the moment Harlem realized it couldn't protect its favorite son. That grief doesn't always wait for a funeral to begin. The kids on the block don't know the full story. Most weren't born when it happened, but they know enough. They've heard the name. They've seen the murals. They've worn the style, leather jackets, fresh fades, calm smiles that mask fire underneath. And sometimes, when the city sleeps lightly, they dream with his shadow trailing close behind. A few of the old-timers still tell the story straight. No glamour, no polish, just the facts, and a sigh at the end. That boy was lightning, they'll say. But the storm always gets here sooner than you think. Across town, a small podcast is recording in someone's converted basement studio. A true crime series. They're covering Rich now. You can hear the soft clack of notes, the shuffle of script pages, the host's voice pitching up with curiosity. But there's a problem. They're getting the story wrong. Too focused on the empire, too little on the cost, too quick to call him flashy, too slow to show his fear. Because Rich wasn't a cartoon king in gold. He was a boy who tried to build a fortress from dollar bills and charm, and found out too late that none of it could stop a bullet. And that's the version of him Harlem tries to preserve. The truth, not the myth. The boy who tried to walk between chaos and control, who gave without asking for headlines, who burned bright because he had to, not because he wanted to. At a middle school near Malcolm X Boulevard, a young teacher assigns a class presentation on local heroes. One student, barely 13, stands in front of the room and says, "I picked Rich Porter." The room stills. The teacher waits. "I know he did things that weren't right," the kid says, "but he took care of people. He gave back. He looked out for kids. For me, that's a kind of hero." There's silence, and the teacher doesn't correct him, because she doesn't have the heart. Because maybe, in some way, the boy isn't wrong. Rich's legacy lives in complexity. It lives in contradiction. And in Harlem, both are native languages. Years after Rich's death, someone finds an old composition notebook in a storage unit once tied to his boutique. Inside, page after page of scribbled numbers, product logs, addresses coded in slang only Rich's circle could decode. But between those entries are other notes, simple ones, quotes, ideas. One page reads, "Success is surviving long enough to become ordinary again." Another, "If I make it past 30, I'll open a school." Another still, "Darnell liked grape soda and hated math, but he believed I was invincible." And that one? That one gets photocopied and pinned up behind the counter of a sneaker store on 135th. No one there knew Rich, but they keep the note up anyway, because belief, real belief, is contagious, and Rich made people believe. That's why he still matters. Not because of how much money he made, not because of how many corners he ran, but because he brought meaning to a moment, a brief pause in Harlem's chaos, where one boy, with nothing but instinct and ambition, bent the rules just long enough to make the whole block dream. And for a place so often robbed of hope, that kind of miracle lasts longer than concrete. So tonight, as the city winds down and the lights blink softer and the shadows gather, Rich's name moves again, lightly, just above the street noise, carried by memory more than sound. No shouting, no sirens, just a whisper. He was here. Morning returns to Harlem like a gentle lie, sunlight sliding between the buildings, pretending nothing's changed, pretending that legends don't disappear in parked cars. that names don't get written in candle wax and sidewalk chalk instead of city stone, but behind the bakery, behind the basketball courts, behind the places where Rich once moved through the air like rhythm. Harlem remembers, only now the remembering comes with silence. No more motorcade of cars behind Rich, no more whispers of his route, just ghosts, and names that sting when spoken out loud. In the days after his death, Harlem didn't explode in revenge. It didn't burn the way outsiders expected. That's the thing about real grief. It doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it just settles deep into the cracks. The revenge, if there was any, came slow. It came in backs turned, in phone calls avoided, in doors that never opened again. Alpo didn't walk Harlem freely after Rich was gone. When he showed up again, years later, nobody smiled. People didn't yell. They just disappeared. The streets made their choice without needing to announce it, and still, the questions echoed. Why him? Why then? Why like that? There's an old theory that floats through the barber chairs and corner benches, that Rich was close to stepping out, that he was shifting everything, money, roots, even crew, that he was preparing to go legit. Some say that was the real threat, not the money, not the power. The idea that Rich Porter could escape Harlem alive, because if he could, what excuse would everyone else have for staying? In those final weeks, before everything cracked, Rich had started doing something strange. He stopped counting, not the money, the losses. He stopped keeping track of the friends he no longer trusted, the brothers who had vanished, the runners who had faded. He let them all drift, like leaves in wind. No anger, no effort, just release. Some say that's how you know he was done. When a man like Rich stops holding tight, the end is already on its way. But Harlem didn't want to believe it, because belief, real belief, is addictive, and Rich had been their fix. Downtown, in a dimly lit office, a young journalist began piecing together his story. She wasn't from Harlem. She didn't know the rules. But something about the quiet around his name pulled at her. She read the files, the testimonies, the interviews that Alpo gave years later. And still, something didn't sit right. The numbers didn't match. The timeline was off. There were too many blanks that no one wanted to fill. So she did what journalists rarely do. She walked the block, took the A train up, got off at 125th, wore quiet shoes, didn't carry a notepad, and she started asking. Not loudly, not directly, just enough to feel the air shift. What she found was something colder than silence. She found protection, of Rich, of his memory, of the part of Harlem that never made it into official records. Old men stared through her. Young ones ignored her. Aunt Janice never returned her letter. But one night someone slid an envelope under her hotel door. No name, no return address, just a photo of Rich, Darnell, and a third boy, standing on a rooftop, all three in matching windbreakers, mid-laugh, eyes full of something bigger than the streets. On the back of the photo, one sentence: tell this story or don't tell it at all. She kept that photo in her wallet for years, not because she ever published the story, but because for once she understood that not every truth belongs on paper. Some belong to pavement, to memory, to shadows that never quite leave. The year after Rich's death, Harlem moved like a man limping. Everything still functioned. The money, the movement, the rhythm. But the energy shifted. The block no longer buzzed with ambition. It pulsed with caution. No one said it aloud, but a kind of street-wide depression settled in. Like someone had pulled the spirit out of the hustle. Like the machine kept running, but the fuel had gone dry. Because Rich wasn't just a dealer, he was a mirror. And without him, no one wanted to look at what was left. The corner kids who used to hand him mixtapes now handed out flyers for t-shirts with his face on them. His story became currency, an image printed on everything from murals to bootleg DVD covers. It was always the same look, rich in mid-smile, usually leaning on a BMW caught somewhere between being a myth and a boy. But what people didn't know, what they couldn't print on shirts, was that Rich had plans. Not big ones, not loud ones, just different ones. Marcus knew. AZ too. In the final months, Rich had begun moving money into strange places. Accounts under different names, business licenses attached to tiny storefronts. He'd even inquired about land in North Carolina, a quiet patch of earth near a town no one had heard of. That wasn't paranoia. It was intention. He wasn't trying to run. He was trying to build something no one could tear down. A future. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real threat. One of Rich's old stash houses, a walk-up on Amsterdam, remained untouched for years. Word on the street was that it was haunted. Not by ghosts, but by guilt. Kids would dare each other to break in. They never did. The landlord boarded it up, but the boards always came loose. Not from intruders, just time. Then, one night, the building burned. Not a towering blaze, just enough to scorch the interior. No arrests, no inquiries, no one claimed responsibility. It felt like Harlem trying to erase a piece of history it couldn't carry anymore. Something about the flame felt final, and yet, even then, Rich's name didn't fade. In fact, it became louder, but not from people who knew him, from those who never met him at all, from artists, from rappers, from hustlers in other cities who clung to the idea of him like a playbook. They turned his story into inspiration, but in doing so, they took the pain out of it. They made him immortal by making him hollow. And Harlem, watching this happen, had to decide, let it go, or remind the world who Rich really was. A few tried. Documentaries with low budgets but high truth. Old heads recording podcasts in back rooms, telling the real story. But for every truth, 10 new myths were born. It didn't matter that Rich hated the spotlight, that he'd once told AZ, "The flash don't save you when the lights go out." People only remembered the flash, not the flicker before it died. Years passed, then decades. The city changed coats again. New trains, new names, new threats. But in Harlem, there's still a rule. You don't speak ill of Rich, not because he was perfect, but because he paid. He paid in blood, in silence, in watching the light leave his little brother's eyes, in losing sleep for years before he lost his life. He paid in full, and Harlem remembers who settles their debts. There's an alley near 144th, narrow and crooked, with bricks that feel older than the city itself. No tourists walk there. No gentrification signs have touched it, but on the back wall, hidden behind dumpsters and crates, there's a scrawl in faded spray paint. 4 words, still running with Rich. No one knows who put it there, but it never gets painted over. Like even the city workers know, some names don't get erased. They echo, softly, permanently, and when the wind hits Harlem just right, you can almost hear it. That laugh, that engine, that boy, still trying to outrun the ending he never deserved. The first snow after Rich's death fell quiet over Harlem. It didn't stick long. City snow rarely does, but it blanketed the streets just enough to make everything unfamiliar for a moment. Like Harlem was holding its breath, unsure of what came next. Kids still played, shopkeepers still swept, but the air felt heavier, like even the snow knew to land softly on ground soaked in memory. In a diner off 138th, Marcus sat in a booth alone. A small radio played low from behind the counter, something soft, something old school, and he stirred his coffee 3 times before touching it. He'd been driving for Rich for years. Never missed a pickup. Never blinked at a red light when bullets flew. Now, with no one to drive, Marcus sat still for the first time in a decade. The waitress brought him his usual without asking. She placed it gently, then paused. "You holding up?" Marcus nodded. She didn't ask more. In Harlem, you don't pry at open wounds. After she walked off, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Yellowed edges, worn center. It was a note Rich had left once, nothing dramatic. Just instructions scribbled fast on the back of a phone bill. "If I'm not back by 9, switch the car and move the pack." He kept it because of what was written on the top corner. "Appreciate you always are." That was Rich, sharp, focused, a man who barely had time to breathe, but he always made space for loyalty. Meanwhile, Alpo's name no longer echoed with awe. It rang hollow. Everyone knew. His story, his version of it, had too many edits, too much justification, too much me, not enough truth. When he was killed in 2021, the city didn't celebrate, but it didn't mourn either. It shrugged, because in Harlem there's a difference between legends and leftovers. Rich died with dignity intact, even if the streets had torn everything else from him. Alpo died trying to recover a throne no one wanted him to sit on. The irony? They started together. Same hunger, same ambition, same streets, but only one understood the weight of the crown. Back in Harlem, a younger generation asked fewer questions about how Rich died. They asked how he lived. A small community center started a scholarship in his name, quietly, funded by anonymous donations. No press release, just a plaque on the wall near the entrance, in memory of Richard Porter, for those who dream bigger than their circumstances. One of the recipients was a boy named Elijah, 15, tall, serious. He'd grown up 3 blocks from where Rich used to post up, but he never knew the full story. Only bits. His uncle once said Rich walked like he was dodging time itself. Elijah didn't want to sell, didn't want to run. He wanted to design sneakers, and thanks to the scholarship, he enrolled in a program downtown. Sometimes, when he laced up his Jordans, he'd wonder if Rich would have worn them, if he'd have liked the design, the clean lines, the understated colorway. That's the kind of question kids ask now, not about weight or corners or stash spots, but about legacy, taste, vision, because Rich had all of that. And even if they didn't want to be dealers, they wanted to move like he moved, deliberate, composed, with the kind of presence that made a sidewalk straighten up. That's the real legacy. The presence. Late one night, AZ stood outside the old boutique. It was something else now. Organic smoothies, probably. The kind of place that charged $12 for ginger. And a smile. He didn't go in, just stood there, hands in pockets, memories drifting like smoke. Someone passing by recognized him. "You AZ?" A nod. "You knew Rich?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, I knew him." "What was he like?" AZ looked up at the building. "It's not what he was like," he said quietly. "It's what he could have been." Then he turned and walked away. Didn't say more. Didn't have to. Because in Harlem, some truths don't need repeating. They're already etched in the brick, in the cracks, in the quiet, in the years after Rich's murder. Harlem didn't just grieve. It recalibrated. People still hustled. Money still moved. But the innocence that had once wrapped itself around the game, thin as it was, evaporated. Rich was proof that no one was untouchable, that even the sharpest, most beloved, most careful could fall, and not just fall, be handed over by someone close. That reality stuck to the walls like humidity. By the mid-90s, the new class of hustlers had emerged, bolder, brasher, less structured. The code that once ruled the streets had eroded. Rich's generation still believed in unspoken rules, loyalty, discretion, family before flash. But the new wave, they played louder, moved faster, filmed everything. And that difference, that was Rich's real wake. He'd represented order inside the chaos. The idea that even illegal empires could have structure. Now that idea was buried beside him, but not for everyone. Some still followed the blueprint. A few who'd come up under his system tried to rebuild the framework. Small operations, tight crews, no loose talk. They spoke of Rich like a fallen general, whispering lessons he never had the chance to write down. "Move like Rich," they'd say, which meant, don't be loud, don't be sloppy, don't trust easy, don't love harder than your shadow can follow. In a shoe repair shop on Lenox Ave, one of the few businesses untouched by time, a small photo sits behind the counter. It's not framed, just taped to the mirror beside a rack of laces. Rich, leaning against a lamppost, hands in his pockets, eyes half laughing. The owner of the shop never mentions it, but if a customer asks, he just says, "That's my nephew." He doesn't explain more, and no one pushes, because in Harlem, if someone gives you a piece of their memory, you don't dig for the rest. You take it like an offering and move on. Meanwhile, outside Harlem, Rich's name continued to live in different ways. In Miami, someone launched a luxury streetwear line, Gemini Method, without context, without care. The founder claimed it was a nod to precision and loyalty. He never mentioned the bodies, the betrayal, the weight. It was just branding. But branding without history is theft. AZ caught wind of it. Didn't make a scene. He just mailed them a book. Game over. Signed the inside. If you borrow from ghosts, at least say thank you. The line folded within a year. Some stories aren't meant to be merchandised. A documentary crew came through in 2003. They wanted to recreate Rich's story with reenactments, grainy filters, and dramatic voiceovers. They interviewed neighbors, teachers, even a retired NYPD detective who'd spent years building cases in Harlem. But when they approached Aunt Janice, she said no, said she'd already buried her nephew once. She wasn't doing it again for entertainment. The crew moved on, but before they left, one of them slipped a note under her door. "Thank you for protecting him." She never responded, but she did light a candle that night. Same window, same time. Every year, on what would have been Rich's 40th birthday, a block party broke out on 139th. No one officially planned it. It just happened. Someone brought speakers. Someone brought food. Kids danced. Old heads posted on stoops, trading stories, half-truths, and full-soul memories. No one said it was for Rich, but everyone knew. Even the cops didn't interfere. They just rolled by, nodded once, and kept going. That night, under the soft pulse of streetlight and laughter, Harlem remembered what it felt like to breathe without flinching, to gather without worrying who was watching, to believe even briefly that something golden once lived there and might one day live again. Rich's name wasn't shouted. It was hummed, in the songs, in the smoke, in the shuffle of feet on pavement. No speeches, no tribute videos, just people living. And that was the only memorial he would have wanted. By the time Harlem entered the 2010s, the skyline had started to change. Cranes, condos, coffee shops with one-word names and prices that didn't match the neighborhood. The storefronts where Rich once paid rent in cash were now leased to companies with logos instead of faces. The sidewalk felt shinier, but less honest, less like home. And yet somehow he was still there, not physically, not even spiritually maybe, but in rhythm. Because Harlem has a memory longer than the buildings suggest. The people who never left, they kept the rhythm alive, in how they walked, in what they whispered, in what they warned. Don't trust too easy, don't get too bright, and never forget what happened to Rich. Every few years, someone would try to tell the story again. Another docuseries, another podcast, another director chasing the shape of tragedy for views. They always got part of it right. The rise, the silk shirts, the charisma, the cars, the kid who made Harlem look like gold. But they always missed the silence, the toll, the pieces that can't be filmed. How Rich moved different after Darnell, how he never smiled the same, how he stopped answering the phone after 10 p.m. Not because he was paranoid, but because sleep was the only thing he hadn't shared with anyone yet. They forgot the quiet grief of a man who had everything except peace. And that's where the real story lives. In a narrow second-floor apartment above a bodega on 147th, a man in his 60s keeps a notebook. He doesn't write poetry. Not exactly. He writes names. Just names. People he knew. People who disappeared. People like Rich. On the last page of the notebook, there's a sentence. He didn't just sell dreams. He carried them. That's the truth. Because Rich wasn't in it for the greed. He wanted control, structure, legacy. But the streets didn't reward architects. They rewarded fire starters. And Rich built when everyone else was burning. That's what made him dangerous. That's what made him different. That's what made him dead. AZ rarely talks about that final week. He could, if he wanted. He knows the details, the timeline, the names, but he doesn't. Instead, he teaches kids now, visits schools, sits in circles and asks, "What do you think makes a man?" And when they say money or fame, he waits. Then he tells them about Rich, the whole version, not the glamour, the exhaustion, the weight of holding a city's expectation while trying to shield a family from the fallout. How he once saw Rich count 40 grand for someone else's rent while forgetting to buy himself socks. The room always goes quiet. Then someone asks, "Did he want out?" And Ozzy always gives the same answer, "Yes." But the door didn't swing both ways. There's a brownstone on 133rd, red brick, ivy creeping up one side. It used to be part of the network. Back in the day, it held product under floorboards and hope in the kitchen. Now it's a daycare. The woman who runs it knows. She doesn't talk about it often. But when the parents pick up their kids, sometimes they pause under the stoop and say, "Wasn't this?" She just nods and smiles, because that's the redemption. Not revenge, not rewritten history, but small, quiet rebirths. A place that once held the weight of a city's sadness now echoes with laughter and little feet running free. And Harlem keeps moving, still layered, still alive, still mourning and celebrating and retelling and correcting. Some nights, when the streets are soft with mist and the lights buzz low, someone might walk past a corner and think they see him. Not clearly, just a glimpse, a shadow in a silk shirt, a smirk under a streetlight, a whisper. "You good?" And maybe, just maybe, they answer, "I'm trying, Rich." Because in a city that forgets fast, Rich Porter remains the rare name that feels like both a memory and a promise. He rose, he reigned, he fell, and somehow, even now, he still walks. There's an old payphone shell on the corner of 143rd, rusted and broken, no longer functional. The receiver's gone. The buttons don't beep. But locals say Rich used to call from there, quietly, always alone, never for long. He didn't like talking in public, didn't trust it. He said phones had ears, and Harlem had more than its fair share. Now that husk of a phone stands like a statue, ignored by most, revered by a few. One kid once left a folded note inside the coin slot. "I won't mess up like they did, thank you." No name, no explanation, just gratitude. Even now, Rich's legend mentors people he never met. It's easy to forget how young he was. He moved like a man with a decade behind him, but Rich barely touched 25. He didn't have time to gray, to regret, to retreat. No years to rewrite, no books to author. Just motion, always motion. And motion, in Harlem, is both escape and trap. He stayed moving to survive, but it's the stillness that got him. The parked car, the pause between beats in the weeks leading up to his murder. Something shifted. Not just the silence, the stillness in him. Marcus remembers. He was looking past me, like he was halfway out the door, but still finishing the scene. AZ remembers too. He started reading books again, asked about business laws, about what it would take to go straight. He didn't say it, but I think he was planning a goodbye. That's the part that hurts, that he might have seen it coming, that he didn't run anyway. But Harlem wasn't built for clean exits. It's a place where doorways open slow and close hard. You don't just walk away. You disappear, or you bleed. Rich bled, and Harlem flinched. Somewhere in the NYPD archives, there's a file with his name. Photographs, reports, timestamps, most of it redacted now. The file's been digitized, but the paper still exists, still carries the weight of what was supposed to be a case and became a cold echo instead. No arrests, no closure, just theories, just silence. The case is technically still open, but the streets closed it long ago. They knew, and that's all that mattered. A middle-aged man rides the 3 train every morning with a small book bag and a face that doesn't ask for conversation. He's quiet, efficient, works security at a warehouse in Brooklyn. He used to run for Rich. Just once he says something. You know why we loved him? The man beside him doesn't reply. He remembered names, not just Cruz, your mama's name, your baby sister's, your barber's kid. He knew who you were, not just what you could do. That kind of leadership can't be faked. It's either in you or it's not. Rich didn't rule Harlem because he had the most muscle. He ruled it because he made everyone around him feel like they mattered, until someone decided he didn't. In the back of a quiet museum in downtown Manhattan, there's a small exhibit titled Street Kings, the Real Faces Behind Urban Legends. Behind a glass case sits a single gold chain, thin, worn. Tag reads, attributed to Richard Porter, Harlem, 1980s. Donated anonymously. No fanfare, no lights, but visitors still stop. Teenagers stare too long. Older men walk away without looking. Some things are too sacred to be behind glass. A young filmmaker in Harlem begins her first project. She interviews barbers, teachers, grandmothers. She asks no one about product, only about peace. Did he want peace? They all pause. All say some version of, yes, but not for himself, for us. And that's what made him different. He didn't build an empire to escape Harlem. He tried to build one that included it. That lifted it. That protected it. Until it turned on him. Not because it wanted to. Because it didn't know how to do anything else. Harlem's heartbeat doesn't stop. It just shifts tempo. The kids growing up on the same corners where Rich once stood don't know his full story. But they know pieces. They know the nods he used to give. They know their older cousins talk about him like he was more myth than man. And they know that when someone says his name, it's never casual. Rich Porter is legacy, but not the kind you inherit with money, the kind you earn with memory. There's a mural on a laundromat wall near 136th. Not a loud one. No crown, no gold chain, no dramatic portrait. Just a small black and white outline of Rich walking away. Hoodie on, shoulders up, hands deep in his coat. Someone added a quote beneath it in Sharpie. Some exits don't come with applause. No signature. No spray tag. But every few weeks the city paints over it. And every few weeks it reappears. Because someone remembers. And they want others to remember too. A boy named Julius grew up hearing bits and pieces of Rich's story. His uncle used to run errands for Rich's people. Nothing major, just deliveries. But he told Julius stories every summer on the stoop, always starting with, "Let me tell you how a real king moved." Julius grew up different, didn't hustle, didn't run the corners, but he moved with discipline, polish, confidence without noise. He became a lawyer, the first in his building, and the day he passed the bar, he wore a suit jacket his uncle had saved from the 80s. Still sharp, still tailored, still Harlem. Inside the pocket was a note. To whoever wears this next, don't forget why we tried. Julius didn't forget, because Rich wasn't just a king. He was a compass, even if the map around him burned. In the back of a fried fish spot on Lenox, there's a dusty photo album under the counter. The owner, Ms. Bernice, is in her 70s now. Still fries everything with love. Still remembers faces better than birthdays. One afternoon, a college student doing a project asks her about the album. She shrugs, pulls it out, flips halfway through, stops on a page with two boys. One grinning wide, one standing calm with hands in his pockets. "That's Richie," she says, "and Darnell." The student leans closer. "What were they like?" She doesn't answer right away. Then, they were loud and quiet, sun and shade, laughed with their eyes, carried the world before they had to. She flips the page, closes the album, goes back to the fryer. Because some answers come with too many echoes. Sometimes people ask, why does Rich still matter? He wasn't the only one who hustled. He wasn't the only one who died. He wasn't the biggest, the baddest, or the most brutal. But maybe that's the point. He was human, flawed, thoughtful, ambitious. He smiled at grandmothers and scolded corner kids when they got sloppy. He gave back without press. He lifted others as he climbed. And he died not because he failed the streets, but because the streets failed him. Rich Porter was the kind of man Harlem needed more of, but got only one. Today, the boutique where he once laundered cash sells high-end pet supplies. The owner has no idea, just likes the space, thinks the neighborhood has good bones. She's not wrong, but she's not entirely right either, because the bones she feels, they belong to people like Rich, people who laid foundation beneath the floorboards, who paid for the mortar with memory and muscle and sleepless nights, who taught Harlem how to walk tall even when it couldn't afford to look up. At a spoken word open mic in a new community space, a teenager recites a piece called Crownless. It ends with a line that stops the room. Rich never died. He just slipped into the sidewalk so we could keep standing. No one claps at first. They just breathe. Then the applause comes. Slow, rising, not for performance, for truth. Because somewhere, deep beneath the city's newest facade, the pulse is still there, still beating, still whispering his name between the cracks. Rich, not just remembered, still felt. In Harlem, history doesn't live in museums. It lives in barbershops, in corner store conversations, in creaky building stairwells where the mail smells faintly of fried food and old dreams. The past moves quiet here, never gone, just waiting for someone to say the right name at the right moment. And Rich, he's still the name that shifts the room, not because people are afraid, because they remember what it felt like to believe. There's a building on 141st with a rooftop view that catches the whole of Harlem's skyline. Used to be where Rich would go to breathe. Alone. No crews. No business. Just sky. Just stillness. A few of the older guys say he'd take his younger brother up there sometimes. Point out buildings, corners. Tell stories like fairy tales. That's where I got my first re-up. That's where I almost got clipped. That's where you're never allowed to go. Darnell, they say, soaked it all in. The lessons, the boundaries, the awe. But what he didn't understand, and what Rich tried to protect him from, was the price. Even on the roof, even with a view, you're still in the game. And the game never forgets your address. Years later, a photographer climbs that same rooftop for a project on New York legacies. She snaps skyline shots, candid street photos from above, an honest look at Harlem's rhythm. Then she stumbles on something carved into the brick ledge, barely visible, worn by rain, years, wind, but still there. RP plus DP forever. She doesn't know who carved it. She doesn't have to. She snaps a photo, frames it, titles the piece, Brothers on the Roof. It sells at a gallery in Soho for Manu $100, but she donates the money to a youth program in Harlem. No credit, no story. Just a check, because some things speak loudest when you say nothing. In a prison upstate, a man who once ran wait for Rich writes letters to nobody every week, never sends them, just writes them. Sometimes in the letters he confesses, sometimes he mourns, sometimes he tells jokes only Rich would have laughed at. He writes because it's the only way to keep the rhythm, the only way to feel like those years weren't smoke. His bunkmate asks one night, "You think he'd be proud of you now?" The man doesn't answer, just folds the letter, adds it to the pile, lights a cigarette, and stares out the tiny window like it owes him closure. Rich's story isn't just about rise and fall. It's about the ripple, the aftershock, how one life touched 10, then 20, then hundreds, how the echo of his choices shaped strangers. A teacher in Harlem once gave her 8th graders an assignment. Write a letter to someone you admire who isn't famous. Most wrote to moms, uncles, older cousins. One girl, quiet, usually withdrawn, wrote to Rich Porter. Her letter started like this: "You don't know me, but I walk past your old store every day. I imagine what you thought about when no one was watching. I hope you know you made a lot of people believe in something." She handed it in without a name, didn't want credit, just wanted it read. Not all stories need to end clean. Rich's didn't. It ended jagged, cut with betrayal, grief, silence. But maybe that's what makes it echo longer. Perfection ends quietly. Tragedy lingers. It keeps asking, what if? What if he'd left earlier? What if Darnell had lived? What if trust hadn't turned to shadow? There are no answers, just echoes. And Harlem knows better than to chase ghosts too long. It remembers, honors, learns, then moves forward, slowly, respectfully, never forgetting the cost. And somewhere, in a small shoebox under an old woman's bed, there's a Polaroid photo, faded, slightly bent at the corners, Rich in a button-down shirt, holding Darnell on his shoulders, smiling, not for the camera, just for the moment. Aunt Janice keeps it wrapped in cloth, still lights a candle on the same day every year, not because she wants to remember, because she never forgot. Years fade, but Harlem still keeps count, not in numbers, in names, in nicknames, in scars. It counts in the way old men lift their heads when they hear a name they haven't heard in decades, in the way a young boy walks down a block and doesn't know he's passing the shadow of someone who once ruled it. Rich Porter was never given a monument, but he didn't need one, because Harlem itself remembers in the way only Harlem can, through rhythm, ritual, and quiet reverence. At a city council meeting in 2023, someone suggests naming a corner after Rich. A local activist, born and raised, speaks for the idea. Say what you want about his life. He gave Harlem a sense of identity during one of its darkest times. The proposal doesn't pass. Too controversial. Too many objections from people who never walked his blocks, never knew his name until documentaries or lyrics taught them how to say it. But that same night, someone hangs a handmade sign over a lamppost on 145th, Rich Porter Way. It's cardboard, crooked, stapled with tape, but nobody touches it. Not that night, not the next. It stays up for weeks, because Harlem decided it already passed its vote. Inside a high school history classroom, a teacher draws parallels between fallen kings and modern empires. She ends the lesson with one question. What's the difference between a ruler and a leader? A boy in the back, hoodie drawn, says, "A leader don't leave you guessing when they're gone." The teacher writes that on the board. Leaves it there all week. Rich's mother passed quietly a few years after him. No press, no headlines, just a small service, few attendees. But on her headstone, carved in soft script, "Now at peace with my boys." People who never knew her visit sometimes. Leave a single rose, a folded dollar, a pair of untied sneakers, not as tribute, as memory. In a recording studio in the Bronx, a young rapper rewinds his verse over and over. He's stuck on one line. "King of Harlem, made of glass." He mumbles it again, then stops, because it doesn't feel right. Too fragile. Rich wasn't made of glass. He bent, he broke, but he didn't shatter. He withstood. He carried. He cracked under the weight of trying to save others, while no one saved him. The artist rewrites the line, "King of Harlem, burned but standing." That feels true. That gets laid down on the track. On the corner where Rich was last seen alive, a man walks past every day on his route to work. One morning, he stops, presses his palm to the wall, and whispers, "I didn't forget," then keeps walking. It's barely audible, but it matters, because in Harlem, remembrance isn't ceremony. It's a reflex, a shared agreement to never let certain lights go fully out. A museum exhibit opens in downtown Manhattan titled "City Shadows, Lost Figures of New York." One section, small, almost hidden, contains a simple black panel. No pictures, just text. It reads, "Richard Porter was a Harlem figure whose life came to symbolize both the aspiration and consequence of inner city power during the late 20th century. He made many mistakes, but he also made a lot of people believe. And belief, in a place starved of it, is worth remembering." Visitors stop there longer than anywhere else, not for the text, but for what's missing. No glamour, no numbers, just honesty. And somehow, that feels like the most fitting tribute. Harlem moves fast again. Different now, chenier in places, policed in others. But when the streetlights hum low and the air is thick and late, Rich's name still drifts. In how kids stand, in how men nod at each other, in how women warn with love in their tone. Don't be too loud. Don't flash too hard. Remember what happened to Rich. He's still the city's caution, still its crown, still the echo that tells everyone after, "You can rise, but watch who's holding the ladder." The city breathes heavier on nights like this. You can feel it in the brick, in the sidewalk steam, in the silence between honks. Harlem doesn't sleep. It rests with one eye open, like it always has. And somewhere in that thick city heartbeat, Rich still walks, not in body, but in echo. There's an alley behind a shuttered barber shop on Lenox Avenue. Faded graffiti lines the back wall, tags from crews that don't exist anymore, declarations of love older than the kids spraying them. One piece has never been painted over, a crown, simple, no name beneath it, but everybody knows who wore it. Kids skateboard past it every day. Some stop, some don't, but none ever tag it. Unspoken rule. You don't mess with royalty. In 2024, a college professor assigns her students a project. Urban mythology. Legends of the modern age. One girl, first gen, raised by her grandmother uptown, chooses Rich Porter. Her thesis opens with this line: every kingdom has a tragic prince. Ours rode a BMW and wore dreams like cologne. Her professor underlines it 3 times, then writes in the margin, "You made me feel it." That paper earns her a scholarship, because Rich's legacy is a paradox. His fall funds futures. A documentary streams online, narrated by someone who never knew Rich, never lived in Harlem, never set foot in 1980s New York. But the interviews speak for themselves. Old voices cracked with memory. She always said he had a soft spot for kids. He used to walk me home if it got too dark. I told him once he should have gone legit. He laughed, said the streets don't offer retirement plans. The last scene shows a slow pan over 132nd Street. No music, just rain, just a voice saying, he was real. For better or worse, Rich Porter was real. And then silence. A 7-year-old boy in Harlem asks his father one night, who was the king before Jay-Z? The father chuckles, thinks for a long time, then says, before rap had thrones, the streets did. And Rich Porter? He had one. The boy doesn't fully understand. But the next day, he draws a picture. Man in a suit, standing on a city block. Above him, a gold crown. Below him, RP. His father pins it to the fridge like scripture. Rich's name doesn't live in textbooks, but it lives in the space between stanzas and rap verses, in the hush before a cautionary tale starts, in the shrug of an old man who says, they don't make 'em like that anymore. He didn't get peace, but maybe he gave warning. A life as mirror, as myth, as monument carved in memory, not marble. And like all legends, he blurs over time. Edges softened, facts disputed, meanings reinterpreted. But the emotion? That stays sharp. Ask Harlem. Ask the corners. Ask the ones who stood in his shadow and survived. They'll tell you in 2 words. He mattered. And so the curtain falls. No applause, no fanfare, just the quiet truth that not every story is meant to be rewritten. Some are meant to be retold. Softly, slowly, like a lullaby with teeth. And tonight, as the city exhales and you sink deeper into the dark, let this be the last name you hear before sleep. Rich. The city has quieted now. The lights behind windows blink slower, softer, like tired eyes closing one by one. Even the streets seem to breathe lighter, as if exhaling everything they held through the night. You're here at the end of the story. And whether you knew his name before tonight or learned it freshly just now, Rich Porter stays with you a little. Not in the noise of it all, but in the stillness. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was a young man who tried to carry too much, too fast in a world that rewarded the bold, but rarely spared them. And for a moment, he burned bright enough to light the whole block. So rest now. Let your thoughts drift like steam over Harlem rooftops. Let the names, the sounds, the weight of it all gently dissolve. The kind of sleep you've earned isn't interrupted by sirens or ghosts. It's slow, smooth, and deep. Let your breath match the city's heartbeat. Slower now. Let every corner of your mind go dim like the end of a long movie. And if your dreams take you anywhere tonight, let them be soft, filled with quiet light, far from the weight of reality. You're safe here. You're drifting. And the echoes of Rich's story are just that now. Echoes fading into silence. Good night.